The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Steven Del Duca might be new to you, but he's certainly not new to politics. Tonight, the Liberal leader is here to discuss his party's promises, his perhaps not being the most exciting leader in this race, and the tragic loss that continues to inspire his political commitment. Then we'll check in on reaction to the Northern Leaders debate with our Ontario hubs. And from mental health and labor to climate change and economics, the Agenda's Week in Review recaps our campaign coverage for the first full week of Ontario's 43rd general election. It's Friday, May 13th, and that's all tonight on the Agenda. After a decade and a half of Liberal governments in Ontario, the 2018 election blew them not just out of power, but also reduced their seat count to below the threshold for official party status. Now they're back with a new leader, a fully costed platform released just this week, and high hopes that the tide will turn back their way. Steven Del Duca has been at the helm for just over 2 years now. He was the MPP for Vaughan from 2012 to 18. In campaign 2022, he is seeking election in the riding of Vaughan-Woodbridge. And Steven Del Duca joins us now here in our makeshift studio on the 4th floor. It's good to have you back here.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Steve.
Pleasure. Now, I got to tell you, in my time watching Queen's Park, which only goes back about 4 decades, I can't recall a new party leader who had a worse inbox, if you like, than you. You get elected to the leadership of your party in March of 2020, days after an international pandemic is declared. We're all in lockdown. You didn't have a seat at the time. You got to raise money. You got to find more candidates than any predecessor of yours ever.
Yeah.
You got to start a policy platform process, and you got to do it from your living room. So my first question is, how awful have the last 2 years been for you?
Look, there's no doubt that it's been challenging to lead the party during this point in time for all the reasons that you described a second ago. But you know, people across this province have gone through so much. It's been so brutal for 2 years. By comparison to so many of them, it hasn't been that bad. But the really exciting part for me and for Ontario Liberals is that despite how challenging it was to start from where we were, look at what we've managed to accomplish, because we created a plan, we rolled up our sleeves, we worked hard, we've delivered on that plan, we've nominated a phenomenal team of candidates. We were the first party to pay off $10 million in campaign debt from 2018. And our platform development process was by far the most open and inclusive in our party's history, I think in any provincial party's history here in the province of Ontario. And that's what helped create our plan. We call it A Place to Grow, which is a fully costed and fair and forward-looking roadmap about how Ontario Liberals want to rebuild the province that we love.
More on that in a few minutes' time. You are, I think it's fair to say, the least well-known of the 3 major party leaders. How much of a handicap has that been for you as you try to connect with voters on the hustings?
Well, look, it's, you know, for sure, as the person who became leader just before the pandemic, it's taken a little bit longer for me to be able to make sure people do know who I am. But that's kind of the beauty of election campaigns. That's what we're engaged in right now. Having the chance to tour around Ontario, to talk about the team, to talk about the plan, and I'm having a ton of fun. So as I'm out there more and more people say that they recognize me, that they recognize our local candidates. But more than that, more than the personalities, they know that we need responsible and competent leadership at Queen's Park to help them. Not for politicians to help themselves, but to help the people of this province. So again, having a ton of fun and being able to introduce myself and talk directly to Ontarians, it's phenomenal.
Before we take a look at your platform, let's spare a moment here to get some of your thoughts about the current occupant of the Premier's office
Sure.
at Queen's Park. Your rhetoric about Doug Ford has got increasingly tough in the last few days. I saw your announcement in Scarborough this morning.
Yep.
You have for many months now actually called him unfit to govern and not up to the job. And yet he's in first place in all of the polls. What do you see that apparently many Ontarians don't?
Well, first of all, and you know this because you're a veteran of covering these things, this is why we have election campaigns. This is why each of the leaders and each of the teams that they are leading and their plans are compared and contrasted throughout an election campaign. That is the conversation and the work that we're all involved in right now. But we have seen repeatedly throughout the past 4 years. We've seen the cuts, we've seen the chaos, we've seen extreme examples of incompetence, and that was all before COVID struck. And then since COVID struck, we've seen the flipping and the flopping and the flailing. You know, I think about my own household, my wife and I raising 2 young daughters who who attend publicly funded schools, parents, families, teachers, students across this province. Think about how many times in the past 2 years we had to wait till a late Friday afternoon announcement about something that might be coming, keeping us all on edge, spiking our anxiety. Whether we're talking about that, no plan to clear the surgical backlog, the fact that he always wants to point the finger of blame at other levels of government, other political parties. I think that Doug Ford is demonstrating, even in the way he's handling this campaign, it's such an important campaign. The fact that he's not talking to anyone, the fact that he's doesn't have the courage of his convictions to speak to the media, the fact that, everywhere he goes, he's reading the scripts that other people are writing for him. I mean, it seems to me, especially at this moment in time in Ontario's history, we need leaders who genuinely know what they want to do and have that courage of their convictions. And to me, Doug Ford doesn't, and that's why I don't think he's up to the job of leading this province.
Do you think, I've heard even his critics say, he has demonstrated a capacity to grow in the office, that he's not the same guy today that he was 4 years ago, as Melissa Lantsman once said, a bull who brings his own china shop with him wherever he goes. Would you agree he's changed?
No, I think what we saw was a temporary moment during the pandemic where the words on the screen in front of him changed. And so he was able to speak to those words, to read those words. But I think about, for example, a budget that we saw just a few days ago, or several days ago now. $1.3 billion cut out of publicly funded education. After what we've all gone through in this province, as an example, the fact that there was no real plan to move the province forward coming from Doug Ford and his team. In fact, his own finance minister refused to confirm when asked on budget day that if re-elected, that they would introduce and pass that budget. I'm guessing you've never seen that. That lack of conviction.
At first, he did that at first. He wouldn't commit to bringing back the same budget at first.
Well, can you think of another finance minister in your 4 decades of covering this stuff who on budget day itself didn't feel comfortable confirming that this was the plan that they really believed in? That's my point about the games that Doug Ford and his team play. And to me, building Ontario is not a game. It's about my parents. It's about my kids. It's about what we need to deliver for them and for everyone like them across the province of Ontario.
Well, let's get into some of the details here of A Place to Grow, which is the name of your plan. And Sheldon, maybe we could bring this graphic up here because the Liberals do have a lot on offer. Most people, I suspect, have heard about Buck a Ride province-wide. That is the $1 transit fare for all the public transit systems in the province of Ontario. The Del Duca Liberals would also cancel Highway 413. They would end for-profit long-term care by 2028. There's $1 billion in their plan to clear the surgical backlog caused by COVID-19. There are multi-year, multi-billion-dollar investments in mental health and addictions. They are offering to bring back grade 13 as an option, hire 10,000 teachers, cap class sizes at 20, and get 1.5 million homes built over 10 years. These, of course, are just the highlights. The document is very detailed, and there's a lot more to it than that. But let me just ask you this philosophical question. If there is an overarching theme underpinning your plan, what is it?
Well, the underpinning theme is, if you talk to Ontarians, as I have now for the past couple of years, and certainly in the run-up to this election campaign, you realize that despite our collective resilience and how strong we are as a people, people are still hurting in this province. COVID has been really, really tough. Obviously, the tragic loss of life, small business owners who were abandoned, who've lost livelihoods, but students, nurses, personal support workers, seniors, people are still going through an awful lot. And when I listen, for example, to Doug Ford and his team talk, it's like they want to pretend that the pandemic never happened. They just want to kind of skate past it. If you look at our plan, A Place to Grow, you see that it is, again, forward-looking, it is fair. I'm proud of the fact, really proud that it's fully costed, and it helps people in their day-to-day lives get through what they're still dealing with.
Well, you say fully costed, but the NDP has done some budget crunching of their own, and I know what you're going to say. You're going to say they announced their plan a long time ago. And
18 days.
And they still haven't costed it, and that is true.
Yeah.
However, they've looked at your plan, and they say there's a $5 billion hole in there that you're relying on the federal government to fill, and you can't do that. True or false?
Well, first of all, it is untrue, and I'll come back to that in a second. But again, let me just highlight, it's been about 18 days since the Ontario NDP released a platform. And by the way, if you take a close look at their platform, it's a platform of mostly warmed up ideas from previous election platforms from them, number one. Number two, no costing whatsoever. And it's been 18 days. Now remember, since they released their platform, Ontario budgets come out, The Auditor General's looked at the budget and talked about those numbers. The Financial Accountability Officer weeks ago put out what the picture looks like in Ontario. And yet we don't hear anything credible from them about their plans.
What about you?
Well, look, every single thing that's costed in our document shows that the federal government's commitments to fund, for example, support for more doctors and nurses, to bring up wages for personal support workers, things that we support. We anticipate and believe that Ontario will get its fair share, roughly 40% of the population, to help fund some of the commitments that we're making. But here's the part that I'm really proud of. Because we are a responsible and prudent alternative to Doug Ford's cuts and chaos, we have built in significant contingencies, $3.5 billion up to $4.5 billion per year, to help stabilize anything that might present a fiscal challenge. That to me is balanced, it's responsible, and it's prudent, and it's all there in black and white for you and the people of Ontario to see. That's a plan that people can count on.
You have much program spending in your plan, but I wonder whether there is adequate attention in your plan paid to creating the economic growth we will need to pay for all of what you are offering.
So first of all of our revenue and economic growth projections are based on what we have seen from, for example, Ontario's Independent Financial Accountability Officer. But secondly, when I talk about publicly funded education, yes, I talk about it as a dad, for sure, but I'm also talking about it from the standpoint of education being just about our very best economic policy. You know, the Conference Board of Canada once said that every dollar effectively invested in public education returns $1.30 back to the economy. You can say the same thing about early learning and childcare, which Ontario Liberals are so committed to. So I look at the Green Jobs Fund that we're going to create. I look at how we're going to deal with accelerating a series of other investments. I look at publicly funded education, lifelong skills training, 1.5 million homes over a decade that we will produce in this province, about 150,000 jobs that we anticipate from that. And when Ontario Liberals do kill Highway 413, I was the transportation minister who stopped it the first time. If elected June 2nd, we're going to kill it once and for all. We're going to take those $10 billion that Doug Ford wants to waste, and we're going to invest that in repairing 4,500 schools across Ontario and building 200 new schools, which will put a lot of skilled tradespeople to work.
There's an old expression in politics, and I know you know it, and that is, how can we elect you to run the province when we're not sure you can run your party? And let me set up this question by acknowledging off the top, as I did at the beginning, you had to find 117 candidates.
That's correct.
Which is more than any Liberal leader ever. So I guess we shouldn't be too shocked that there are a few. There's a few in there that have done and said some things that obviously have rubbed you the wrong way, and they are no longer your candidates.
It's true.
But it does raise the issue of whether or not you've got your act together and whether you have got a vetting process that is adequate to the task.
So I guess I take a slightly different perspective on this. So number one, you are correct about the circumstances where we found ourselves 2 years ago, but putting that to the side for a quick second, and again, not forgetting, first party to pay off the $10 million debt from the last campaign, free membership, totally open and transparent platform development process. And by the way, 122 candidates running for the Ontario Liberal team who are new. I'm talking about doctors, municipal leaders, nurses, teachers, principals, small business entrepreneurs, not-for-profit advocates. It's an incredible team of talent who are ready to start the important work of rebuilding Ontario. But to me, this is sort of the modern test of leadership. You know, I've witnessed as both Doug Ford and Andrea Horwath have been confronted with challenging information about some of their candidates or caucus members, and yet they wait, and they equivocate, and they delay. In the case of the former star candidate for Andrea Horwath and Ajax,
Steve Parrish.
Thank you, Steve Parrish. It took her, I want to say weeks at the very least, to finally realize that what he had done while mayor and after being mayor there was unacceptable. Well,
he defended the posting of a sign, I think, in the community that honored a Nazi officer during the war.
That is correct. And when confronted with that information, instead of saying decisively, because that's out of step with what her party and what Ontario believes in, she kind of dragged it out, dragged the puck, as the saying goes. And it took weeks. Similarly, we see Doug Ford. He's got caucus members who have said things on reproductive rights for women, for example, unconscionable. And yet they're still in his caucus. One of them was the parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Education.
That's Sam Osterhoff.
It's Sam Osterhoff.
He's pro-life, though. That's it. He's pro-life.
But again, you know, my point is that leadership today requires that you take an informed and responsible but strong stand when something is what you don't believe in. And Ontario Liberals believe in tolerance, we believe in diversity, equality, expanding opportunity for everyone in this province, and that's a standard that I'm proud for our party to live up to.
Okay, in our remaining time here, again, going back to the fact that people, I suspect, know you the least of all the leaders, I'd like to just, I normally don't ask personal questions, but you've talked about these things in the past, so
Sure.
I think they're fair game.
For sure.
I've been going door to door with a lot of candidates from all the different parties just to see what, what's going on, what happens out there. And one of your candidates the other day, and I won't reveal who the candidate is, said at the door, I know Steven's not the most exciting leader out there. But then she added, but he's smart and he's ethical, and I'm good with that.
Right.
I don't mean this to sound unfair or anything, but do you have any idea why you are not quite as charismatic or as exciting as a lot of political leaders feel they need to be successful?
Oh, look, I don't spend a lot of time obsessing about whether or not I have, the dazzling smile or the right haircut or whatever else it might be. Look, what I'm focused on is making sure we have the plan. And we do have a plan that will be good for the people of Ontario.
You do this all the time.
But hang on,
you're pivoting away from my question
to
talk about...
But think about what we need in Ontario right now. So let's put this in a sort of in a first-person example. If, God forbid, you or a loved one got sick or needed treatment from a doctor or surgery, God forbid, would you want to know as you're being wheeled into the operating room that doctor had the world's greatest smile, or would you want to know that she or he paid attention at medical school? Pretty sure you'd want to know that they're a good doctor. You hop on a plane. Do you want to know whether or not the pilot can deliver, the world's greatest and most memorable speech, or that he or she knows how to take the plane off and land it safely? So what we need right now in Ontario is responsible, competent government. Leadership that shows up, that sweats the details, that looks into how we're going to create the plan that we need in this province, and then has the work ethic and the dedication to actually deliver on that. And that's what I am all about. My grandparents and parents taught me and my siblings, there's no shortcut to success. It's about hard work. And frankly, Steve, I believe that's the Ontario way. And so we're going to keep talking, we're going to keep working hard, but I'm focused on people in this province and what we can deliver for them.
I want to make a hard turn now and ask you about what I'm sure was the worst thing that ever happened to you in your life. And I don't know how many people know this, but you and the Premier actually have something in common.
We do.
You have both lost a brother under incredibly tragic circumstances, and you talked about the death of your brother, Michael, in a video. And let's just play a snippet of that. Shelton, if you would.
My younger brother, Michael, passed away from a car accident. To this day, almost 4 full years later, there's this little imperceptible shock that reminds me it actually happened. It was devastating. I'd had coffee with him that morning. That was the last time I saw him alive.
I just lost a friend who I'd known for 50 years to a hit-and-run car accident. So, but he wasn't my brother. But I am curious, how long does it take before you get over the white-hot fury of injustice at seeing a tragedy like that?
Because you described it as white hot, I guess that I've moved on from being white hot about it, but the ache, the emptiness, the pain, it doesn't go away. I mean, it doesn't. You don't feel it the same way. I mean, it was June 21st of 2018 when this happened to Michael. All of those memories from the moment learning about it to talking to our family about it, sharing the news. Those are seared into me and my memory. They will be for life. But the emptiness of knowing he's not around and I can't talk to him, I can't have a coffee with him like I did the morning that it happened, can't get a hug from the guy, can't be told that I'm not doing my job properly because he's my younger brother, so he was always trying to hold me to account. Watching his sons grow up without him around because they're still young, my nephews, all of it is just horrible. And I don't believe that goes away. People say that time heals. I don't think time heals. I think it helps, but it does not heal. And I don't expect that this wound will ever heal.
12 years difference between you two?
12 years, yeah. Michael was the baby of the family.
Were you kind of like a second dad to him?
Wouldn't say a second dad per se, because our dad is pretty awesome. But did have the chance when Michael was younger to coach him in hockey. Did have the chance to take him to a lot of hockey tournaments. And then later in life, when he became a real kind of fitness fiend, he helped me get back into shape a couple of times. So we spent a lot of time at the gym, and it's every day. Miss him every single day. But we have a lot of fun as a family sharing the memories and laughing about what they were like, because the times were really, really good.
Have you, I know you and the Premier don't share a lot of political views, but I wonder if the two of you have ever had a conversation about the thing that you have in common.
No, we've never had a direct conversation about it. No, and I know, I'm having gone through it, I'm sure it was quite horrible for Mr. Ford and his entire family to go through losing Rob, you know, but we've never spoken about it directly.
You ever spoken to him at all?
Yeah, I have. I mean, I'd met him a number of times before becoming leader, before he became Premier. And since the pandemic started, if I can put it that way, we've had the chance to speak probably about half a dozen times. And I provided advice around the vaccine certificate, around, I think back to a few of the other ideas that we put forward at the earliest stages. And the conversations have been cordial and respectful, but obviously, you know, for the most part, not taking the advice that was offered. And I think that's a real shame.
Okay, we've got a couple of minutes left here, and let's finish up on this. We're on the 4th floor today because our studio, where we normally do this program at the moment, has been converted for a leaders' debate, which will be taking place on Monday.
Yeah.
Now, you did participate in the Northern Ontario leaders' debate,
yeah.
but I think it's fair to say this one is going to have a larger audience than that one. That one was focused exclusively on Northern issues. I wonder what you see as your mission in as much as Mr. Ford did one last time. This will be the 4th time for Andrea Horwath.
Right.
First time for Mike Schreiner, but he's been a party leader for longer than you.
Right.
You're the rookie on that stage. More pressure?
No, look, I'm so excited about having the chance to share directly, like literally directly with the people of Ontario in a very unfiltered way, why I believe I have the capacity to lead this province and why we have the plan that's fair and forward-looking and balanced and fully costed. And I think it's really important for democracy, and I think it's really important for Ontario families to see what I hope will be a healthy clash of ideas rather than some of the traditional mudslinging. So I want to keep focused on the people of Ontario and what they need and how our plan responds to them. I don't know what the other three are going to be doing, but that's my hope, and that's certainly what my objective will be come Monday night.
Do you have any sense, just finally here, about what you need to do to close the gap? I know people are fond of saying they don't play a best of 3 in the Stanley Cup playoffs, they play a best of 7, so we have many games still to go.
That's also true. Yeah.
But you have a job to do that so far hasn't completely paid off dividends yet. You're in 2nd place. What do you still have to do?
Look, again, it's that uninterrupted, in a way, unfiltered, direct conversation with the people of Ontario. I think people across this province might not pay as close attention to politics the way that you and I do and others like us do, because they're busy, because they face a lot of challenges. And as I said earlier, because of this pandemic, lots of them are still hurting. But I think they're going to tune in, they're going to hear about it, they're going to talk amongst their family and friends. And what they're looking for is a leader who gives them confidence that she or he knows how to actually deliver, is competent, responsible enough, thoughtful enough, has the capacity to lead this province in the progressive way that it needs to be led. And I am excited about my chance to make that case directly to the people of Ontario.
6:30 p.m. Monday night on TVO. Steven Del Duca, leader of the Ontario Liberals. We're grateful you came into TVO tonight and answered our questions. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Steve.
Earlier this week, the 4 major party leaders met in North Bay for the first leaders' debate of this campaign. It focused on issues confronting Northern Ontario. Nick Dunne covers the Northeast for Ontario Hubs, and he joins us now on how it went. Hello, Nick.
Hi, Jan.
All right, so we're going to talk about healthcare. Northern Ontario is not a monolith. There are a number of concerns that range throughout that part of Ontario. Talk to us about the concerns from that region specifically.
Right. So healthcare here is a real problem. Every day I drive by a street on the Brady Street, and there are 150 crosses there, all representing people who've lost their lives to the opioid crisis. This is just a reality in Northern Ontario where we have, double the death rate than the rest of the province. And this is, a huge issue that's affecting all the cities. Another one, just access to basic healthcare, particularly in the rural regions. So in Red Lake earlier this year, the emergency room had to shut down. And this is a mining town where there can be severe accidents, and the nearest emergency room for there was at least 100 kilometers away. A similar situation is unfolding in the town of Thessalon and Bruce Mines right now. So the healthcare shortage here is very real, and Northern Ontario does see very acute issues around mental health and addictions.
Did the leaders make any headway on those concerns?
Right. So, you can look at the PC government under Doug Ford. They've implemented, or they've turned the Northern Ontario School of Medicine into an independent university. They've funded various PSW and nursing programs, but the shortage does persist. I think the leaders did talk about addressing the gap. So the NDP plan talks about addressing the 300 doctor shortage that's been reported by the Northern Ontario School of Medicine. The Liberal leader, Steven Del Duca, he promised within 24 hours you can get healthcare access. So boosting up the healthcare system so that it's a little bit more accessible there.
All right, I want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk about transit and highways. So obviously a big conversation when we talk about Northern Ontario. I want to show a clip that shows a little heated exchange between the leaders on the topic of the Ontario Northland Transit Line.
Well, Mr. Del Duca, very, very simple question. Why did you cancel the Northlander? And Ms. Horvath, you propped them up. You propped them up, so you were supporting canceling the Northlander, and you canceled it. Why did you cancel it?
So really quickly.
Marcus, could I just ask a quick question here?
Yeah,
so Mr. Ford is right about that.
It's a direct
but I have
question.
a question for Mr. Ford.
Yeah.
Will you actually bring back the Ontario Northlander? You promised that in your last platform and didn't deliver. We need the Northlander, and we also need expanded bus service from Ontario Northland for intercity bus connections. Are you actually going to do it this time or not?
We're actually the only government that's bringing back the Northlander.
All right, so I should mention that the Northlander rail service, which operated from Toronto to Cochrane, was canceled in 2012 by the then Liberal government, saying that it was too costly to be subsidized. So with that being said, why is the Northlander so important for these leaders to be debating about?
Well, first of all, it's funny because all these parties are effectively promising the return of the Northlanders. So, there was a lot of bickering about something that seems to be a bilateral issue, and yet still isn't operational yet. So I think that's a pretty emblematic issue of politics in Northern Ontario. So, but to get to your question, the Northlander, it's very important because this is a 700-kilometer track, passenger rail from Toronto to Cochrane. Not only is it useful for tourism purposes, so bringing people from Southern Ontario pretty effectively and affordably up north in a speedy way without having to, if they don't have a car, it's a little bit easier. But the big thing is healthcare. Healthcare appointments, even if there are more hospitals, and there are indeed hospitals across Northern Ontario, but specialists and specialized services are sometimes needed in the south, particularly for Cochrane and communities like Moosonee, right, that have very acute healthcare needs that connect the James Bay coast. So having that direct access line to Toronto in an effective way is very, very important.
Outside of the Northlander, what are the other parties talking about when it comes to transit?
Mm-hmm. Well, highways is a big thing here. All the parties have made various promises to, expand highway services. So, twin Highway 17 from Kenora out towards the Manitoba border. Twinning Highway 69 up towards Sudbury, implementing a 2+1 system along Highway 11. But I think the key thing to understand here is that, in the Southern Ontario context, highway expansions typically involve, reducing congestion, perhaps encouraging outward expansion. In Northern Ontario, it really is an issue of basic safety. These are roads that people have to drive on every day, sometimes for hundreds of kilometers. It goes through rough Canadian Shield. They're very narrow, and they just happen to be a corridor for industrial and commercial traffic.
I want to bring up two more hot topic issues, affordability and the housing crisis. They emerged as big issues in general. Did the debate reveal any real solutions in terms of tackling those issues?
So affordability, I mean, I think the PC government is, touting its jobs programs, trying to stimulate the economy with its critical mineral strategy. I think the Liberal Party, it didn't necessarily get mentioned in the debate, but they're leaning towards immigration, bringing on an immigration minister, which could help grow the region here. And then the Ontario Greens and the NDP, I think, are focused on, improving services to make life a little bit easier on people. So they're all different ways of tackling affordability. On housing, again, I think this is an issue that kind of goes across the province, but unfortunately, the speculation in the GTA has really begun to affect housing prices up here. I mean, far more affordable than the South, but a 60% price increase from 2019 to 2021 rather in North Bay is a real shock, not just to the housing market and affordability, but to the rental market as well. And there are various builds in place, promises to build housing. I believe the Ontario Liberal Party is creating the Ontario Home Building Corporation, so they'd be building homes to first-time home buyers, and they'd be financing that through that. There's a similar plan with the NDP, the Ontario Housing Agency, which would be building rental housing for families and keeping it within the kind of rental system. And then for the Ford government, they've said that they want to continue implementing their housing affordability strategy, which our colleague John Michael McGrath has written about quite a bit for TVO.org. So I'd look at his analysis for what that strategy could entail.
Nick Dunne, really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for your insights of Northern Ontario for us people down south. Thank you again.
Thanks, Jan.
The agenda this week assessed the party's approaches to labor issues, mental health, and the climate crisis. The agenda's Week in Review begins, questioning how well economic policy mixes with political messaging. We are going to put a few of the party's promises under the sort of expert's microscope, if I can call it that, tonight. And we'll get each of you to weigh in on what you believe makes economic sense and perhaps what doesn't. And let's start with what I think has captured a great deal of attention during this election campaign, and that is the Liberals' so-called Buck-a-Ride province-wide plan, where they would essentially subsidize to the tune of $700 million the first year and more than $1 billion in the second year the cost of riding the rails or the buses or the streetcars or whatever, wherever you live in this province. Let's go through this. Armine, what do you think?
Oh, I think it's a genius plan because it's directly taking on Buck a Beer, which lasted all of a few weeks, and I think only one brand put it out. So a Buck a Ride is actually transformational as a form of public infrastructure that will literally put money in the pockets of the people that need it most and deal with our problems with climate change and carbon emissions and increase the demand for better public transit. And it also rivals the highway plan of the incumbent government. So in every way, it is a real alternative to what's on the menu if we kept on with this government.
Allison, Buck a Ride province-wide. What do you think?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to disagree. I think it's not a great idea. I totally get that the heart is in the right place or maybe near the right place, but you have to means test things like these because you're building an infrastructure that has to be paid for. And if you give a buck a ride, that's a buck a ride if you're a multimillionaire living in a mini mansion, and if you're somebody living on minimum wage. That doesn't make fiscal sense to me.
Ken, let me get you in.
Well, the interesting thing about voting in Canada is increasingly the richer you are, the more likely you are to vote Liberal. And the Liberals in their press release on this said that this was for people living in Oakville going to the Jays game. And so they're targeting rich people and subsidizing rich people taking transit. Now, you know, as Allison just said, if you really want to help poor people take transit, then subsidize poor people's transit. Don't give $100 a ride to anyone that's out there. And so the Liberals are just targeting their swing voters, which are rich people in Oakville, and trying to win the election by doing that. But I think it's bad public policy. Although, Ken, I mean, you're a guy who's been involved in many election platforms in the past. You'll have to admit that Buck a Ride province-wide sounds better than Buck a Ride as long as your income isn't too high and you're eligible for it and low enough income, right? that, look, elections are about sending signals about the kind of priorities that you have to the general population, and you have to do it in a way that is catchy, and you can't put if you're explaining you're losing. And so sure, that it has a nice jingle to it, but that doesn't mean that doesn't make it good public policy. You can have a good jingle and have good public policy, but this is neither of those things, or one of those things.
Okay, Armin, you want to come back on any of this?
Oh, you bet. So, we're talking about a government that is in power that wishes to spend $25 billion on highways. And that also advances the economic interests of those with more money than less money. This actually spends more money on the poorest, the people that don't have cars, the people that need to rely on public transit, the people that are looking for work that are long-term unemployed, the disabled, people on social assistance, the unemployed, students. Everybody gets to discover their city, discover Ontario and where you live in your own community. Where it fails is the group of people that don't live in urban centers with good transit. That is its only failure. Because in my view, to encourage people to take public transit is a social good. And you want to encourage rich people to take it too and not just stick in their cars. Plus, if you don't have a car, it's good public policy. If you do have a car, it's good public policy because it's going to take people off the road. So win, win, win.
All right. Having said that, Alison, is there any evidence that we know of that suggests that if you offer this kind of inducement to people, they actually will do what the hope is behind this thing, namely either leave the car at home or help more people take transit? Will it actually do that?
Well, I think it might help people leave the car in the parking lot where they jump on the train. I'm not really sure exactly who isn't taking transit because it's too costly now. So that's part of the picture. But look, I totally agree that this is it's much better to build the infrastructure around public transit than what the Conservative Party has on offer, which is to build more roads. Both of those plans seem to go in opposite directions. So what are we really trying to do here? We're trying to build ways to move people around that doesn't cause or contribute to climate disaster. So in that way, the policy wins, but it has to be paid for. And that is, I think, the thing that worries me when politicians talk about giving across the board breaks to people regardless of their ability to pay. It really interferes with that idea that the tax system, first and foremost, it should be fair. And this isn't.
Let's now take a look at the four-party platform, starting in order of precedence in the last House, therefore with the Progressive Conservative Party. Now, of course, the parties have got a lot to say. We're just putting up some of the bullet points here in the PC plan. $114.4 million over 3 years for what they're calling a skilled trades strategy. Increase the general minimum wage to $15.50 an hour on October 1st of this year. Expand college degree granting in applied fields. $15 million plus over 3 years in the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program. And of course, they got $25 billion for highways in there as well, which will presumably provide a lot of work for a lot of people. Joe Mancinelli, up to you first again. What do we think of this PC plan?
Well, clearly representing 90,000 construction workers in the province of Ontario and being the largest construction union in the country, clearly that kind of infrastructure dollars being injected into the economy is very favorable for our members and their families. So very important information that's come out of that, and previous information that we received earlier on, like the $40 billion for hospitals and long-term care facilities and a number of other projects like $23 billion towards schools as well. Very, very important because, during the pandemic, it was the construction industry that kept on working, keeping the economy going. And we just need to keep on going in order to inject funds into the economy because the ripple effects affect not just construction workers, it affects the corner store at the corner and other manufacturing and a whole bunch of other things that our members purchase as well.
Angela, there's one Labour leader of significance who gives a thumbs up to this current government. What say you?
And I think that when his members are having jobs created, that makes absolute sense, right? from a broader economic analysis, I think that if we're concerned about productivity and productivity growth, we should look at what those jobs are created. So I absolutely support investing in infrastructure and creating those jobs for those construction workers, but let's do it with the biggest bang for our buck. So rather than using public-private partnerships that cost more over the long term and deliver less, let's build it publicly. So rather than public-private partnerships for highways, let's build publicly owned hospitals, schools, childcare centers. Let's use that money to build public long-term care homes. We saw during the pandemic, private long-term care homes actually had much worse outcomes for workers. So let's focus on what we know works and what we know is actually more affordable over the long run, which is public infrastructure. And the other piece, I think, is that it's obviously not just those skilled trade workers that we need to worry about if we're thinking about productivity. Education is huge for productivity. So kindergarten to grade 12, last year they underspent the education budget by $1.3 billion. If we're concerned about productivity, we need to be investing in youth. We need to be investing in post-secondary education, whether that's for apprenticeships or for universities. That's how we grow our economy, and that's how we get a more productive future for everyone.
Rocco, maybe I'd direct you towards the provisions for minimum wage there, which the government says will go up to $15.50 an hour. Of course, more to come on the other parties on that regard. But do you think that will act as a disincentive for business to hire more people if that were to take place?
Look, the vast majority of our members pay well in excess of the minimum wage already. And there is a war for talent out there. So it's rarely the arbitrary level that's set by any government. The market really sets what you're going to need to pay in order to get the workers. What we need to be focused on is how do we build an economy where there are as few minimum wage jobs as possible, and I agree with Angela. Look, education is crucial. Apprenticeship is crucial. I wish I had known when I was going through school that one day OPG would be paying welders at the Darlington refurbishment between $150,000 to $200,000 a year. Skilled trades are a phenomenal pathway to real middle-class existence that can afford houses, et cetera. And the work that Joe and his members do on the training front to really lift up particularly underrepresented groups, whether it's Indigenous, whether it's women in trades, is really going a long way to making a fundamental difference in the life that we want for all of our friends, family, and neighbors.
Lori, how about you on this PC plan? Thoughts?
Thanks. I think some of it is too little too late. Of course, we'll take any increases to minimum wage, but really, had the plan be struck from the get-go, they would have been far better off than they are right now. Infrastructure does need to happen. So similar to what we've heard already from Angela, I do support that. But I think when you're looking at public services and public sector, we all need public services, and that is so critically underfunded that it really needs to be a focus for this government, and it's not. So we need a government that will provide the focus and dedication to our public services.
How are we going to raise the money that we need to put more money into the system that you all want to see?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think one of the issues that we have to think about is the fact that if you say, for instance, look at what I think it was the Greens or the NDP was saying, and if you look at what the Mental Health Commission is saying, they're not saying that mental health, you need to raise more money for mental health. They're saying that the percentage of health spending for mental health should be between 10 and 11%. So they're not saying raise more money, they're saying it needs to be equitable. So that when you're doing your health spending, you need to find within that health spending 10% or 11% for the mental health services. So that's not raising money.
Okay, but let me jump in on that, Quam. If you're not proposing to spend more money on the health envelope in particular, and you want to actually take, I'm not going to say this well, but what I'm trying to get at here is if you want 10% out of $70 billion, that means that somebody else's ox is getting gored for you to do that. Does that get us any further ahead when it comes to the overall health of the province if you want 10% of a static budget?
Well, the budget, I think, when they went into, when I was working with the ministry, the budget was 54 million. The budget is now 70 million. So the budget's increasing. Billion. Sorry. That's why I'm not going to be finance minister. So the money, it goes up year on year. The question is whether you oversize the amount that goes to mental health in order to try and balance and produce a fair budget. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is looking at, say, for instance, primary care and saying, how can we better support primary care to help mental health? So you're saying we've already got the resources there. How do we repurpose those resources for mental health? We know that we've got a big resource, which is families and caregivers. How do we support those, which is a low-cost thing, to give better support? How do we support them to give support? So all of these things are things that don't necessarily have to cost a lot, just like the idea of better social policy.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to follow up with Camille on that, because I guess every dollar you spend on mental health, Camille, is a dollar you probably don't have to spend building a prison, is a dollar you don't have to spend building supportive housing because people are not going to be homeless, is a dollar you don't have to spend on welfare, for example, because you'll just avoid a lot of those downstream problems. You know, based on your experience on this file, do you think politicians who set budgets get that?
Yes, I think they fundamentally understand the intellectual side of that argument, but I think they also are cognizant of a 4-year term that they're in, and I don't say that critically. What I think is more important, Steve, from my perspective on all of this, is that mental health, if we're truly thinking about it in terms of our health, overall health, is held to a different standard. And by that I mean, would we be having this conversation if we were talking about a type of cancer care or kidney failure? If there was a need for more service in any other part of the healthcare system, would we be saying, how are we going to pay for that? I just think we'd find a way to pay for it. And for some reason, mental health is held to a different standard on occasion. The Mental Health Commission of Canada indicates that $50 billion is lost from our economy every year because people can't perform in the workplace. So this is 2% of our GDP. So this is on any other issue should be getting a whole lot more attention and a whole lot more money, clearly, and focus to find a better way forward. If we're serious about pandemic recovery, what could be better than ensuring that people are mentally healthy and mentally well and able to return to the workplace and able to ensure that they're contributing to our economy? So I think to your point about the deficit in terms of how to pay for it, I think there are dividends at the end if we get it right.
Yeah, Tatum, can I get you just maybe to pull the curtain back on maybe some of the meetings you have with political people? And do you make the argument that you wouldn't leave a broken leg untreated? How can you leave, mental health issues, a broken brain, if you will? How can you leave that untreated?
Well, I mean, absolutely, and the reality is there's a moral imperative to address these issues, but there's a real economic imperative as well, both long term and short term. So we know, for example, that 70% of adults who have mental health challenges would say that the onset of these challenges were when they were in their youth. So from a child and youth perspective, the sooner you start to address those issues in their youth, it reduces the demand on the system for people when they're adults. Now, there's lots of policy areas in which we talk about these kind of long-term savings, but even in the short term, I mean, in-year possibly kind of savings, with a 900-day wait or even a 1-year wait or even a 7-month wait for access to community-based services, it significantly increases the likelihood that a child will need to go, sadly, to the emergency room, where care, the health human resources are all much more expensive than they are in the community.
The way to relieve congestion is by building more transit, like Aaron was speaking to, right? We need to expand the GO network. We need to expand regional transit in areas. We need to get that intercity transit going. We're talking maybe now about high-speed rail here in Ontario too. I mean, we've been behind on building transit. We've got an infrastructure deficit. It's hundreds of billions of dollars because transit's been so politicized. It's expensive to build. It takes a long time to build. Every government that comes to power has their own transit plan, and then there's jurisdictional battles between municipalities and the provinces, and they're asking for, anyway, it's super complex. But we need to build transit as part of the answer, and we want to build also, it's how we build communities, right? People need to be in densities that support transit. There's enough people living close by that we can justify building a GO station there, or a subway station, or an LRT station. And people want to live in walkable neighborhoods where they have a choice to get around. And that's one of the problems with the mode of development being offered in Ontario, is that it is more highways, it's more sprawl, it's more car dependency. It's going to put more cars on the road, do nothing to alleviate congestion.
Okay. In our remaining 7 or 8 minutes here, let's talk about creating jobs and regulating industries. And Aaron, I'll get you in here first. We're seeing some awfully big numbers tossed around in this campaign, and I want to get your view on that, because the Green Party, for example, is pledging $1.7 billion over 4 years to cover 1 year of college and paid apprenticeships for 60,000 students entering the so-called green workforce. The New Democrats are talking about creating 1 million jobs and by transitioning to a green economy. I guess I need to know off the top here, do you think these kinds of promises with such big numbers are realistic?
Honestly, as much as I'd like to believe that all of that would happen, another piece of the puzzle is not really being addressed, which is investing in the clean innovation to create all of these green businesses that people can eventually work for. Another consideration is there's a lot of really great investment happening in youth jobs, which I completely support. But I'm even in the process. I also am a consultant at SCB Consulting, and we're trying to hire new immigrants as employees, and we're having a hard time getting funding for them, people who are transitioning into the green space or have experience. So I think the funding is good, and if they want to throw big numbers on it, that's fine. But they also need to think about how we're going to support the innovation to create the actual jobs that these people can then work for in the long term.
Okay, if you're talking about investing in clean innovation, that's going to take me to a D next, because your company, Clear Blue Markets, specializes in carbon pricing and offsets. And I think we need to understand just off the top, give us an idea of how a so-called output-based system works.
Yeah, output-based pricing system is essentially a carbon price on industrial emitters. So it creates the price incentive or the price signal for them to reduce their emissions and also invest in clean technology alternatives. So essentially it puts a emission intensity benchmark that the facility would need to meet, or if they exceed it, they have to pay for each ton of CO2 in excess of that benchmark, and it provides the incentive to reduce their emission intensity. So how much do they emit per their unit of product underneath that benchmark, so that they can generate credits that they can then sell to other regulated emitters. So it's putting that price signal and incentive to make that transition.
So you're trying to create a market, essentially.
Yeah, it's a market-based system, and it's set to protect the competitiveness of these industries, understanding that we still need the cement and steel for our economy, but trying to encourage them to produce those products in an energy-efficient way.
Okay, so if it's a market-based system, it sounds like a very capitalist thing to do. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yes.
So you'd think if you were a conservative, you'd be into this?
Absolutely. It is by nature a conservative approach to addressing, climate change and emission reduction. So it provides that flexibility and having the market to set the price and reduce emissions in a cost-effective manner. Carbon pricing is one of the most effective tools to achieve emission reductions in an efficient way, and it's used globally to incentivize that transition.
In which case, if it's, I'm really trying hard not to lead the witness here, but if it's a capitalistic idea, market-based, that conservatives ought to like, how much support have you seen in the current government of Ontario for this idea?
So Ontario, we do have a provincial industrial emitter program called the Emission Performance Standard, but that has been largely driven by the federal government's requirement for all the provinces to have their own carbon pricing system. So while we do have it, and it is meeting that federal requirement in terms of stringency and pricing, and it will be revised after the election if the Conservatives are victorious, then they'll have that system in place, and that will regulate industrial emissions in the province. But we have to think that can that program stand on its own if the federal government was not mandating that requirement? If there's a change at the federal level, will we still see this program in Ontario from the Conservative Party?
And that is just some of what we examined this week. You can find more from the week, including the full conversations, on our website, tvo.org, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or on our Twitter feed, that's twitter.com/theagenda. And for all our election coverage, including our On Poly podcast, which airs every weekday during the writ period, please check out tvo.org/Ontario Election 2022. And that's it for this Friday, May 13th, 2022. On Monday, we're hosting the province-wide Ontario Leaders Debate in our studio, which is why we're up here on the 4th floor tonight. And right out of the debate, we'll break down what happened, how the artificial intelligence algorithm Polly saw Ontarians reacting to it, and consider if anyone gained or lost momentum from the evening's proceedings. Hope you'll be with us for that. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you again on Monday at 6:30 p.m. for the Leaders Debate.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism. Ontario Hubs are made possible by the Barry and Laurie Green Family Charitable Trust and Goldie Feldman.